Backtracking, a word often associated with covering already covered ground a second time in order to progress through a game, and regularly a word said in a negative tone. The Metroid series has long featured plenty of backtracking. The way that the maps are laid out and the method of returning to old areas after obtaining upgrades in order to access new areas pretty much single-handedly spawned an entire genre of its own. So we have a mainly negatively reviewed concept that is the core for a mostly positively reviewed series. How does that work? I think most of the series could be used to highlight the point, but let's hone in on Metroid Prime 2 Echoes to talk about refining the backtracking process. My name is Sunder, and you're watching Levelhead, a series about video game design. As I said before, the Metroid series focuses heavily on obtaining items and upgrades in order to give the player weapons power or mobility to return to previously visited areas and open up new paths. Metroid Prime 2 was my ideal candidate for showing how the series makes this interesting for several reasons. But the main one is that it's the title with the most backtracking in it, probably out of any Metroid game. It permeates the whole game like a proper Metroid, but in addition features a huge backtracking secret hunting quest to find 10 keys that allow you to access the final area to fight the end boss, the Emperor Ing. The collection of these keys is pretty vague without a guide. All of the key vessels are not only well hidden throughout the dark world, behind and under things and in inconspicuous nooks, but they're also invisible unless the player is using a certain visor. For these reasons, this part of the game has been rightfully criticized by many and can be frustrating. But finding the keys, that's the issue. Getting to the places where the player thinks the keys are, not a problem at all. Echoes is self-aware of the amount of running around, map checking, and retracing steps the player will be doing not only during this last section, but throughout the entire game, and plans its systems and mechanics accordingly. There are quite a few rooms in each area that will initiate a full lockdown of the doors when entered, forcing the player to defeat a set of tough enemies like these dark space pirates in order to be allowed to leave. This will halt movement, yes, but the designers knowingly only made these one-time occurrences. Later in the game, entering rooms with these enemies may proc the combat again, but the doors will remain unlocked to ensure the player can just continue about their business if they're not interested in fighting. This is a particularly big benefit to the backtracking model, as Echoes remains to be the only Metroid game in which the beam weapons have ammunition counters. This leads to not only having to track missile count and power bomb count, but also dark and light beam ammo, which drops somewhat inconsistently by defeating an enemy with the opposite beam. Since there's more management to the ammo, the design is built to allow the player to bypass most enemies after the initial encounter. The battles are designed for a one-time experience, a single head-to-head struggle in which the player uses up resources. Later on, they can opt to fight again for drops or to make the movement through the room incrementally more convenient, or simply pass through on their way to a larger objective. And that's just the general encounter pacing. There's plenty more that helps this along. Because the player is going to be picking up plenty of upgrades, every time they revisit a room for whatever reason, they're going to be wielding more power than the previous time. So perhaps finishing off some nasty enemies will be a challenge at one point in the game, but later with massive upgrades it becomes a simple ordeal of launching a single super missile or blowing a power bomb or screw attacking through anything in the way. The upgrades trickle in, so that each area as an isolated segment of the game has gradual progression, but once conquered the player has to travel through other areas again if they want more ammo tanks or energy tanks. And those areas that were played through hours previously now feel like feeble challenges against the might of an empowered Samus. It's a combination of increased abilities of exploration and showcasing how much stronger Samus and the player have become since the beginning of the game. These design choices not only empower the completionist in players, urging them to get more upgrades to feel more powerful with each engagement or bypassed engagement, but also keep from inhibiting the speedier of players, since running straight through a room with even the toughest of enemies will net only a minor energy loss and allow the low percent style of players to continue on their path. This is curated by the fact that ammo is not the only factor to Samus' strength as a player avatar. As many games work, the Metroid series places several bosses in the way of the player and forces them to deal with these threats. In return for overcoming powerful creatures and machines that end cap every area, major upgrades are dropped to give Samus and the player not only the means to reach new areas, but also equipment that increases quality of life in rooms previously visited, where increases in ammo allow the player options in how to tackle encounters in rooms. Major upgrades, namely the boost ball and the screw attack, give the major freedom of plowing through previous threats without a passing thought. This is a major empowerment factor, giving the player the tools necessary to run over enemies that once gave them trouble with the push of a button. And in the end, when it comes to the hunt for the 10 keys to open the way to the final boss, I'll reiterate that the only real issue is the vague hunt itself. No room poses real threat, no enemy stands in the way. This is the max power Samus that doesn't falter to the corrosive energy of Dark Aether. This is the Samus that drops sunbursts, dark bursts, and sonic booms on any enemy that's crazy enough to try and block her path. This is the proper way to empower a player through their backtracking. Thanks for watching. This show is made possible by my Patreon supporters. You can see their names on screen right now. Big thanks to you guys. If you want to join them, help the show continue, and have your name in the credits, you can head to patreon.com/Sunder. My name is Sunder, and I'll see you next time.